Hello everyone, my name is Muhammad. Today is going to be my very first video on my new created channel. Our channel is going to be basically on drawing and learning how to draw, even for experienced people who have knowledge, basic knowledge, or maybe advanced knowledge about drawing, and as well as for beginners who have no experience at all with drawings. So today just we can talk about the basic, what is drawing, what are the basic shapes and constructions that build an object, how to see it correctly, and the difference between looking and seeing. Because when it comes to art and drawing, there is a big difference between drawing and between looking and seeing. For example, like as you daily experience looking at a lot of stuffs, objects on streets, at your homes, different kind of places, and you see something or you look at something, then you recognize, okay, this is a car, or this is an apple, or this is a table. But the difference between looking and seeing is actually being able to see and analyze how the object or the shapes that builds this object. For example, let's take a piece of paper. So to start with drawing, you definitely don't need like a very experienced tools or the best pencils, drawing pencils on the market, like for example Faber-Castell, which are kind of expensive. But at this stage, as a beginner, you definitely don't need a very expensive tools. What all you need is actually very simple pen and piece of paper. And regarding papers, you definitely at the very beginning, you don't need like very expensive or like kind of decent sketchbook to start with, but no, instead you can just pick up any piece of paper, like drawing paper or typing paper or any type of paper you have in hand, and just start with it. So to start with drawing, you have to recognize that every object that you want to draw has three different shapes. For example, like our main shapes in drawing, when we talk about drawing, are a line, simple line. Let me pick up another pen, like for example, a very simple line, or a curve, or a circle, or a square, or a triangle. So the very first rule that I actually live by when it comes to drawing is each object, doesn't matter how complex or simple the object is, when you break it down, it actually contains these three shapes. So I'm going to show later on how to create or to draw something, starting by drawing these shapes. But first, if you are a very beginner, you first need to kind of like get familiar with the pen and paper to actually start with the very simple step, which is actually like you can simply start drawing lines. You can start to draw different lines just to get familiar with the paper and the pen, you know. Like for example, if you like start drawing different lines and maybe in different directions, just to kind of like have more control over your pen, because this is what all about actually. So once you create like different lines, you can move on to, for example, like different shapes, which are the curves. And as you see, I'm not like moving my hand fully. I'm not moving, just my wrist is very stable, and I'm just moving my hand, this part, as you see. And you don't need to rush at all. Like for example, if you try to do this, okay, you might think it's simple, and it is simple, yes, but you first have to really understand that mastering these shapes is what all drawing about, what drawing is all about. So which means like instead of trying to draw a line, like for example like this way, try to make it like as horizontal as possible, like this way or this way. And you can try to move a little bit faster, that's fully okay, just to get familiar with the paper, with the pen, you know. And afterwards you can move on to a little bit more complex shape, for example like a circle. Make a little bit smaller or bigger, and try to make it as accurate as possible. Like there is no harm to draw like this, like an oval for example, but it's better actually to first try to move, like to draw like 100% accurate circle, as you see here. Because as from my experience, I can only recommend this, which is specifically drawing circles. Drawing circles has a huge effect, more than you think, actually, to get stronger and stronger, because hand needs to be practiced. Knowing the rules and the basic about drawing theoretically is not enough. You need to practice, and in order to master practicing and drawing, you need to start with the very simple shapes, you know. For example, this, or maybe a little bit bigger, smaller, a little bit bigger, and so on. Moving to the next shape, for example, square. You can try to make it square, or maybe rectangle as well, which actually is, if you divide it, it actually contains two squares, a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. And you don't necessarily have to move fast as I am moving now. You can actually take your time drawing it slowly, and so on and so on. Moving to the next shape, which is the triangle. You can also start simple like this, or maybe a little bit symmetrical, a little bit smaller, or maybe you can change the rectangle to different kind of shapes. And moving on, you will notice that you are becoming more faster and faster by drawing these shapes. And there is a very, very important reason about starting with these shapes, which I'm going to show afterwards, of course. So, but for now we are going to stick with these shapes to maybe to make these shapes combine together. Like for example, if you wanna draw like a circle and square on top of it, and maybe a triangle and so on, and maybe a small square here, and so on and so on. You might think it's simple, and it is simple, as I said previously, but it will help you becoming more stronger and stronger, because as I said before, your hand really need to be practiced and needs to be get stronger and stronger, controlling the pen, controlling the paper, because you really have to control what you are drawing, you know. And don't be afraid of making any mistakes, because only from making mistakes you become stronger and stronger, and you learn from your mistakes. So making mistakes in drawing is totally fine. It's actually, in my opinion, it's highly recommended. Make mistakes, that's totally fine, because you will learn from it, you know. So if you want to, for example, if you want to draw a circle and it become like this or like this, for example, it's totally fine. With practicing, you will be able to draw a very nice circle, you know, and your hand will be automatically stronger and stronger, you know. So if we stick to these shapes, we can actually move to the next level, which is actually like creating more complex shapes. For example, like an oval, small or bigger, or even bigger. Or maybe one circle on top of it. The more you draw, the more control you will have on your pencil, because as you see here, I'm not like drawing a circle like this with a very certain line that has one thickness, but I'm moving I'm actually like changing the pressure on my pen accordingly, whatever I want, whatever I don't want. And this is actually comes only with practicing. The more you draw, the stronger your hand will be. And we can actually stick to these shapes as well, moving maybe to the next level, which is actually like, for example, if you wanna draw, like, let me give you an example. This glass, it's very simple shape, it's not complex, and yeah. So for example, if you want to draw these shapes or this glass, so first, before we start, let's look at it, see it, and try to analyze it. These shapes that we draw, do they exist in this glass? Actually they do, and I will show you where. For example, this is the first circle. It's not 100% circle because we are looking at it from this perspective. So it's kind of like, from where I'm seeing it, it's kind of like an oval. So if you want to try to, for example, to analyze it, I start with an oval, which is actually this shape. And this shape has this rectangle. So the first line and the second line, and as we do have here an oval, we have also an oval at the bottom, which is actually only half visible for us, which is actually from this side, because the second side, or the second half of the oval, is actually from the back side, which is not visible. But if we imagine it, it's actually also an oval, but what's visible for us is actually only this part, which is actually this part. So as you see, we have an oval as a first shape, we have kind of like rectangle, and we have the third shape, which is the oval. So if I pick, like, for example, this pen and mark or like highlight what creates this shape or this glass is actually the oval, the first line, the second line, and the oval. You can also move from there to add some more details, which is actually this thickness, because as you see here, you can see the glass has some thickness here. For example, if you draw another oval here, we kind of like get this thickness that the glass has. The same goes for this one, and as you see, we kind of like have this 3D dimension look of a glass. It's not like just a glass, very simple shape, but it actually has a shape, and I can see it's a glass. I can recognize it, you know. And yeah, for example, let's take another example. If you want to draw, for example, like a box, very simple box. So the box is actually square. This is the very first shape that creates the box, right? But if you look at the box, is actually one square. If I look from it, like from this perspective, it has another square and this line connecting everything together. So looking at the box from this angle, it will create automatically, using these shapes that I showed you previously, create actually our box. So as you see, this is exactly why I mentioned previously that these shapes are basically the core, I would call it the core shapes of the drawing, because using these shapes you can literally create anything in the world, anything. So regardless if it's complex, if it's simple, you should just keep in mind every shape in the world contains these shapes. Like, for example, if we want to take like a little bit more complex example, like for example, let me take for example, let me take the stairs, for example. Yeah, very simple example. I'm not gonna deep dive into details, of course, but if you look at the stairs from the front or from the left perspective, it's kind of like look like this. If I wanna simplify it a little bit, it kind of like look like this, right? But if we wanna draw or try to analyze the stairs from different kind of perspective, it's kind of like, for example, has this square shapes that I showed you here. Let me redraw it. And the stairs are actually, if we are looking at the stairs from the this kind of perspective, it's kind of like goes like this, right? So if I draw this profile here, we can actually just like draw the lines in a vertical way, in a horizontal way, sorry, as I showed you before. And now we kind of like have our stairs. The stair is might be a little bit more complex example, but I just wanted to show you that even complex objects contains these, or are built based on these shapes. Like if I wanna highlight the lines, as you see here, it's very simple. You don't have to practice, but this example is a little bit more complex. But as I told you, I just wanted to show you that even complex objects are built based on these shapes. If I remove these lines now, we kind of like have these stairs, right? Taking another example, which is, for example, like let's take maybe a piece of fruit. For example, let me think of something might be a good example for our showcase. Yeah, let's take for example an apple. Very simple example. As you know, the apple has, if you analyze it before you draw anything, if you analyze the apple, it actually contains this very square shape, right? So I can start with drawing very simple circle, and if you look at the apple, it actually has this transform, which I actually moved on after I draw my main circle. So first I start with the very first shape that I see in this object, which is the square. Then I move on a little bit further, adding more details. And from the top, we have this area where the leaf comes out. And as you remember, I told you also curves are important, right? So as you see here, we have very small, tiny curve and another curve to create this. And the leaf. The leaf, as you know, it looks like pretty much like this, right? But if you like, as I said, if you also analyze the shape of the leaf, it is actually an oval. But when you draw an oval, after drawing the oval, you do have the basic shape of the leaf. Now you move on to add more details, to transform this shape a little bit, right? And you have the curve, of course, and small curve and small curves. And you don't necessarily have to stick to this kind of leaf. You can create any leaf you want using these shapes. For example, if you wanna kind of like exaggerate this shape to another leaf, another kind of leaf, you can start with, for example, a circle, an oval, as I showed you in the first slide. And now you kind of like draw these curves while you are transforming this shape by adding more and more and more details. And small curves to add some more details, and so on and so on. And don't be afraid of making any mistakes. Make mistakes, that's totally fine, because you will learn from it. Or maybe another leaf, kind of like square leaf, not 100% square, but it looks like square shape. So we start with a circle, and we add maybe triangle. So as you see, I started with the triangle, circle. Now I have two shapes, right? One, triangle, and the circle. Two shapes. Now I move on to add details, to add more curves, and we have the middle curve here, right? And the small curve, and we can add more details. Of course, you can go a little bit further with details. For example, like adding more small tiny curves as well, to kind of like have this kind of realistic feeling of a leaf. So going back to our example, which is the apple. So as I said, we start with an oval, then we start adding, after having our oval or our shape, we start adding some details, and so on and so on. So as you see here, we kind of like created different kind of objects using only the base shapes that I showed you. The square, the circle, the square, the triangle, maybe rectangle, line, and curves. Let's take another example. And showcase it in our today's session. Like for example, let's take a watermelon. A watermelon is very simple shape, right? So if you analyze it again, it's kind of very square shape, right? So we have our square, but the watermelon, as you know, it's kind of like have these curves on top of it, right? But if you imagine it like as a 3D, as you are seeing the real watermelon, so it's definitely not gonna look like this, right? But it's actually gonna look like pretty much like this. So the curves, as you see here, I transformed the direction. I changed the direction of these curves based on this circle. Because, like, for example, this is the middle of the watermelon, right? This is the middle. So these curves should actually face this curve. And the deeper, or the more you move to the middle, the straighter your line will be. So this kind of like 3D look of the watermelon, because it is square, and we kind of like try to make it 3D, to make it like physically accurate, you know? So drawing this, like if we redraw it quickly, so we start with a circle, as I said, and we add our curves, straighter, then we move on to the final curves. And now we have this kind of feeling of like square shape. So after having this, we can move on to draw some details, because it's kind of like not 100% curves, but it has like this kind of like very small lines. It gives you like this kind of like zigzag feeling. I don't know how to call it, honestly, but it's basically just adding very small lines that gives you this kind of feeling, you know? And so on and so on. So staying with this very simple example, if you wanna, for example, let's say we wanna draw the watermelon but cut it in half, for example. So we start again with the circle. We have our circle, and if it's cut it in half, so it's gonna look like this, right? Very simple. But we kind of like wanna go a little bit further with details, right? So if you draw, like, for example, an oval, in the middle of it we have a circle and we have an oval. So if you highlight this oval and the bottom part of our circle, you actually have the watermelon cut it in half. I'm gonna remove the upper lines because we don't need them, and as you see, we now have the shape that we need using only two shapes, the oval and the circle. And of course you can add some more details by drawing the seed, for example, and maybe the curves again, as I showed you in this example. And now we have the watermelon cut in half. So this is basically what I wanted to deliver in this session. And you can try it out using any kind of pen you have in hand, any piece of paper. As I said at the beginning of this session, it doesn't necessarily need to be like a professional sketchbook or kind of expensive paper. No, you can start with anything you have, any pen, a pencil pen, or any kind of pen you have in hand. It will do the job, because at this stage our goal is just to practice and move step by step into shadings, into perspectives, into maybe characters drawing, into more complex shapes, into shadings, for example, which of course I'm gonna talk about in the upcoming sessions. But today we're gonna stick with the basic as I showed you, and yeah, you can take it as a homework if you want. Just try these shapes out to create very simple shapes or very simple objects that you have. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. And as I'm new here in this channel, I would very much appreciate it if you hit subscribe and follow for more content. And thank you very much. And remember, everyone can draw.